ahead of the October budget update, the Albanese government will hold a jobs summit on the 1st of September, bringing together business, unions, welfare organisations and state governments. Now, already, as I've said to you at the top of the show, big business, they want their wish list adopted. They want an increased skilled migration of around 200,000 places a year. Given all the challenges that we've got in power, hospital beds, housing, gridlocked cities, I want to ask you, is this the right call, or is something else perhaps motivating our business leaders? Joining me now, economist and columnist for The Australian, Terry McCrann, who's probably forgotten more on this topic than most people will ever know. Terry McCrann, I'm not surprised to see business want 200,000 in. We'd started to bring those numbers down under the former government. They want to ratchet them up again. But are we stupid enough to fall for it, or do you think this is the right move?
Well, let's slightly separate the two things, Peter. I think the summit itself is a statement by the government, an announcement by the government that doesn't have a clue about what to do about the economy more generally, and more specifically about how to create jobs that pay well and jobs that are sustainable into the 2020s. Secondly, we have business desperately wanting a short-term fix for the problems we now face, given the reality of COVID, the lockdowns, and the ongoing reality of COVID with all the shortages continually that we get when people have to isolate because they've got COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So the two things are slightly separate, but they come back to this basic point that bringing in hundreds of thousands of workers is really like a heroin fix. It's not something that makes sense for Australians generally, and it's not something that makes sense for the economy going forward. It's going for quantity rather than quality. And I'm not talking about the migrants themselves. I'm talking about the idea that we can get a more successful Australia simply by having a bigger Australia. That's counter to all the logic of having a more qualitative, better Australia, which is what will deliver ultimately the real wage increases and also the business success, which are the two things you would have to assume is what business wants, it's what the people watching this program want, and it surely must be what government, if it actually understands reality, would also want.
I made the point at the top of the show, Terry, that they cloak it in this argument that it's skilled migration to somehow mollify Australians who are concerned about the Big Australia push. But when you look into the detail, in the pandemic and the current job shortages that we've got now, we're not talking about rocket scientists that we're short of, or brain surgeons that we're short of, or CEOs. That's not what it is. It's all the jobs that Australians don't want to do. It's the low and entry skilled jobs. They're the ones that we're actually trying to import, but they're not going to tell us that truthfully business. And of course, it will lift demand and put downward pressure on wages, boost profits for companies as well. That's the main objective. And the sop for government is it artificially has a growth inflator in the budget. That's the real truth in this push.
Right. Exactly. I mean, what this government is promising with this combination is an absence of prosperity in an inflation-led recovery, so to speak, that we'll get the inflation partly from the specific policies the government is embracing in relation to energy, the climate fantasies. At the same time, the immigration input will be putting downward pressure on wages. So the government is actually setting up a future where, yes, business will be satisfied, as you've put most succinctly, higher profits and getting the labour that it wants, and you'll have the inflation, which again business is quite happy with, but you won't have the actual increases in wages and living standards that 25 million Australians want.
I've suffered through these summits before. I mean, they're just a great big pick-fack, picture opportunity to put out the news is to look like you're doing something. I mean, what came out of Rudd's 2020 summit? Sweet bugger all. What came out of Ken Henry's tax summit? Very, very little other than a mining tax and a carbon tax that we then repealed. He had death taxes, if you remember, on the table. How do you get something like this to actually have outcomes rather than just be a talk fest?
Well, the summit that worked was 83, the Hawke Summit in 83, where he brought together big business, big government and big unions, when you did actually have big unions which covered the economy and big business, which could speak for the broad spectrum of business, both big business and small business. But critical to the success of the 83 summit was that you had a specific objective which was there in the government's mind before the summit, and that was the Prices and Incomes Accord. And you critically had key players of the most, and the single most important was Bill Kelty, who delivered the union movement. You have none of that now. So you need the objective, you need the players. You have none of that coming into this 2022 summit. You just have this sort of wishy-washy wish list of saying, give us ideas about how we create jobs, give us ideas about how we create jobs that will increase real incomes, give us an idea about how we get jobs for women, etc., etc. It's all shaping up to be a replay of the very worst aspects of that Rudd summit in 2008. All talk, a little bit of fest, and very little outcome.
Spot on, Terry McCrann. Lucky you got such a good memory. See you again.